Welcome to the Hoja on Architecture podcast. The Origins of Architecture, Chapter 3, The Agricultural Mind. In the previous chapter, we explored how the transition from mobility to permanent settlement transformed humanity's relationship with space, continuity, and collective organization. We examined how settlements gradually emerged through repeated occupation, environmental familiarity, and long-term spatial investment. In this chapter, we move from settlement to cultivation. The discussion is no longer centered solely on where humans stayed, but on how they began to systematically reshape environments to sustain life over time. Agriculture is often understood narrowly as the cultivation of crops, yet historically and conceptually, the term refers to a much broader system of environmental management that includes plant cultivation, animal domestication, and related forms of controlled biological production. For this reason, the frequently used phrase agriculture and husbandry can be somewhat misleading, as animal domestication is already part of the broader framework of agriculture. What emerged during the Neolithic period was therefore not merely farming in a limited sense, but a comprehensive transformation in how humans organize relationships with land, animals, resources, and seasonal cycles. This transformation fundamentally altered the human experience of time. Earlier forms of survival depended largely on immediate environmental responsiveness. Hunter-gatherer societies moved according to seasonal opportunities, adapting continuously to changing ecological conditions. Agriculture, however, introduced a delayed return. Seeds planted in one season required anticipation of another. Food production became connected to prediction, continuity, patience, and long-term planning. Once cultivation emerged, human beings were forced to think beyond immediate survival. The future became materially embedded within everyday life. Storage systems, seasonal preparation, resource management, and environmental observation acquired unprecedented importance. Architecture, under these conditions, could no longer remain entirely temporary, as agricultural life depended on continuity over extended periods. This continuity transformed settlements both structurally and socially. Temporary camps could function with relatively flexible spatial arrangements, but agricultural life required increasing permanence and organization. Storage spaces became essential because food surplus needed protection from the climate, animals, decay, and theft. Boundaries became more stable because cultivated land required long-term control and maintenance. Space gradually evolved into an organized system of production, preservation, and distribution. Agriculture, therefore, did not simply change food systems, it reorganized spatial logic itself. Earlier human environments prioritized movement and adaptability, whereas agricultural settlements prioritized continuity and predictability. Circulation patterns became more repetitive, labor became more specialized, and relationships between domestic and communal spaces became increasingly structured. Architecture began to respond not only to environmental forces but also to cycles of cultivation and storage. This process also transformed the relationship between humans and nature. In earlier conditions, survival depended primarily on understanding existing environmental rhythms. Agriculture, however, encouraged the active modification of these rhythms through irrigation, land preparation, domestication, and environmental intervention. Humans increasingly shifted from adapting to ecosystems to partially reorganizing them to meet collective needs. Yet this transformation should not be understood as complete environmental control. Early agricultural societies remained highly vulnerable to drought, disease, seasonal instability, and ecological unpredictability. The agricultural mind, therefore, emerged not from domination over nature, but from an intensified dependence upon environmental continuity. Humans became more invested in specific landscapes precisely because their survival now depended on maintaining them over time. This dependency strengthened the relationship between settlement and territory. Agricultural life required stable access to cultivable land, water sources, and domesticated animals. As a result, settlements became increasingly rooted in fixed geographical locations. Architecture no longer mediated only between body and climate, but also between community and territory. Space acquired stronger economic, social, and symbolic meanings. The emergence of surplus also transformed social organization. Earlier survival systems often limited long-term accumulation due to mobility-restricted storage capacity. Agriculture, however, enabled the production of surplus beyond immediate consumption. This surplus supported larger populations, more permanent settlements, and increasingly differentiated social roles. Architecture gradually began accommodating these new forms of complexity through storage facilities, collective gathering spaces, and more specialized spatial arrangements. At the same time, surplus introduced both inequality and stability. Once resources could be accumulated, controlled, and distributed unevenly, social hierarchies became increasingly visible within spatial organization itself. Certain structures acquired greater importance, storage areas became strategic locations, and distinctions between communal and private space intensified. Architecture therefore became connected not only to survival and continuity but also to emerging systems of authority and control. This agricultural transformation also altered human relationships with labor. Daily life became structured around repetitive seasonal cycles, including cultivation, harvesting, preparation, storage, and maintenance. Labor was no longer defined only by immediate environmental response, but by long-term environmental management. Settlements increasingly functioned as coordinated systems of collective work. Under these conditions, architecture became inseparable from routine. Paths between storage areas, cultivated fields, hearths, gathering spaces, and animal enclosures formed repeated movement patterns, shaping everyday life. Spatial organization emerged not only through abstract planning but through habitual repetition. Architecture gradually became embedded within agricultural rhythm itself. The agricultural mind also transformed the symbolic dimension of space. Fertility, seasonal continuity, rainfall, animals, and land productivity acquired increasing cultural and ritual significance. Agricultural societies became deeply aware of cyclical processes connecting survival to environmental stability. This awareness contributed to the emergence of ritual spaces, collective ceremonies, and symbolic relationships with the landscape. In this sense, agriculture changed not only material production, but human perception of existence itself. Time became cyclical rather than purely immediate. Space became associated with continuity rather than temporary occupation. Settlements acquired emotional and symbolic attachment because generations now remained connected to the same landscapes through repeated labor and memory. These developments reveal that agriculture should not be reduced to a technical innovation alone. It represented a profound cognitive and spatial transformation, reorganizing how humans understood time, environment, territory, labor, and collective life. Architecture emerged within this transformation as a framework capable of stabilizing increasingly complex relationships between people, resources, and landscapes. The architectural consequences of agriculture, therefore, extended far beyond the construction of larger settlements. Agricultural life required systems of organization capable of supporting continuity across generations. Buildings, storage spaces, circulation patterns, and territorial boundaries gradually formed interconnected spatial networks. Architecture increasingly operated not as an isolated shelter, but as an infrastructure for sustained collective existence. This also explains why the origins of urban thinking can already be detected within agricultural settlements. Once production, storage, labor coordination, and social differentiation intensified, settlements naturally became more structurally complex. The agricultural mind therefore established many of the conditions that would later contribute to the emergence of proto-urban environments. In the next chapter, we will move from cultivation to construction itself. We will examine how early humans began transforming earth, stone, timber, and mud into increasingly organized architectural systems. The discussion will shift from environmental management to material assembly, from settlement continuity to structural permanence, and from agricultural organization to the emergence of the first walls. Because once humans began reshaping landscapes systematically, the next step was inevitable: learning how to reshape matter itself into architecture. This concludes Chapter 3 of The Origins of Architecture, the Agricultural Mind. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.